Dennis, I think you have requested an addition to the agenda.
Yes, Your Honor. After the approval of minutes, a brief time for a public statement regarding surface water utility management matters.
By Mr. Kevin Stroop.
Mr. Stroop, yes. Thank you.
Okay. Any other changes to the agenda? If not, let's go to agenda item number 3, which is to consider the approval of the minutes of the last regular city council meeting that was held on July 25th, as well as minutes of a work session that was held on July 31st. The council does have the minutes of both. Are there any corrections?
Mr. Mayor, I would move approval. Second.
Motion by Steve, seconded by Craig to approve. Discussion.
Join meeting.
That motion passes. And I'll call on Kevin Strupp.
There's nothing down below it. I can't log in.
Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank the mayor, Mr. Simpson, Mr. Olson, and Carla, and the other two for meeting with me this afternoon to talk about the surface water assessment issue. And the city will provide an accounting of money in and money out with a description of what the project money was spent on. So that issue can be tied together for some citizens with some basic questions on that. So we appreciate the city getting that put together. I understand that will happen within the next 2 weeks, and I'll meet with Carla and Glenn to go through that. So thank the city for that. Appreciate the meeting this afternoon.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin. We'll move then to agenda item number 4. Agenda item number 4 is a public hearing. This is a public hearing on the ordinance amending the non-conforming use, the discontinuance of the use by when a property is destroyed. That's really what this deals with. Following the public hearing, then we'll consider the ordinance that would adopt this. So with that, I would call on Glenn Olson, Director of Public Works, City Engineer, to conduct the public hearing.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This was actually initiated by a council member that was aware of a state law change that allowed a damaged building, acts of God, to be reconstructed in its current location at the same size or type that it was before. So city staff put together a revision to the ordinance, and so that it's allowed without a variance or additional conditional use. We did add some wording so as not to expand the use. For instance, if you had a one-car garage that burned down or struck by lightning or the wind took it away, you could put the same thing back in but couldn't double the size of it without going through the variance process. So that's what this indicates, and we would recommend approval.
Okay. We'll open up for any public comment, either from the council or from members of the audience as part of this public hearing.
This came up, I believe, and Councilmember Lazinski can let me know if I'm wrong, but when he and I went to the newly elected officials conference, they put a lot into the variances and conditional use permits. And if something, the conditional use goes in the land. So if once you have a conditional use, no matter what, that conditional use stays with the land into perpetuity, basically. So when you have a structure that burns, gets destroyed, whatever, instead of having to come back to the city for permission, you just build it the same way it was before, and that use stands. So that's what and apparently that's not the way the ordinance was written, so we're here to rectify it.
Good. Any other input as part of the public hearing? Any member of the audience wish to speak? If not, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved. Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Jim. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. So we'll now consider the ordinance that would provide this amendment. Are there any questions about the ordinance as it is written?
Mr. Mayor, I would move to accept the ordinance as now written.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Jim. Discussion? If not, sorry about that. We'll move to a vote.
Oh, that was by Steve.
Mr. Mayor, correction on the initial motion was made by Dr. Meister. I think you said Craig.
Oh, I'm sorry. We'll be sure that's corrected in the minutes.
I'll still vote yes for it. I just want to make sure the right.
So we'll still move to a vote. The motion passes. So we'll move to agenda item number 5. This is the second public hearing of the evening. This is a public hearing on the ordinance that would amend the exterior materials ordinance of the city council, or of the city. So there's 2 public hearings, and we may as well talk about both of them at the same time. One deals with the Heritage District, which is the downtown that has to deal with the selection of colors and that type of thing, and materials for downtown buildings, and the other is more general throughout the community. So I'll call on City Engineer, Director of Public Works, Glenn Olson, to conduct this first public hearing, and then of course he'll conduct the second public hearing.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This was initiated by the Planning Commission to discuss how, in fact, we should continue to address aesthetics in the downtown district. If you remember years ago, there was a considerable push by the city to make the community look better. One of those areas was the downtown. If you recall, we had a lot of, it's not a historical district, but the historical look to the downtown had been changed over the years by different types of construction, whether that's metal fascia over the top of the bricks or different types of signage or marquees. And there was a committee formed of the downtown group for the recommendations for how the aesthetics should be for the downtown heritage district. Now, we have several different districts. We have the downtown districts, we have a heritage district, we have zoning districts, we have lots of different districts. And the district itself was created, and if you're interested in what the heritage district is, we call it the downtown area. So one of the changes that is recommended is that the Planning Commission didn't feel real comfortable with the selection of aesthetic materials. And I want to talk about that in conjunction with the next hearing as well. But with the description of the materials. So we can certainly do that as staff, and if there is any disagreement, that could go to City Council still. But we want to minimize the amount of variances or conditional uses or in this case, variances with building materials for the downtown. Now, the original color palette that was reviewed and approved by this committee and recommended for approval ultimately was earth tones. They wanted it to sort of comply with the bricks and mortar and that look in the downtown area. So that's really how that came about, of what the color palette was. So if somebody would want to use a different color, they would have to come through the city for a process. So as this kind of morphed over the years, there were examples like, well, how about a subway awning? It was yellow and what's the other color? Yellow and red, yellow and green, yellow and green. Certainly wasn't an earth tone, but you know, it was the colors of that franchise. So anything that had a franchise color then was added to the palette. So if you had a franchise color and you wanted to put that business in downtown, you could use those franchise colors. Then it was, well, how about if you have a flower shop and you like the brightness and the colors of greens and yellows and things like that, and reds. There was one across the street from City Hall. And that went through a process, and the group said, we think that's okay, just not the up and down portions. We'd like to see that not that bright color. The banner part of it was okay. So really, it does come from what at the time is an appropriate look for the downtown. We continue to have significant changes in backgrounds of people that live in Marshall and create businesses in Marshall. And sometimes their requests are for a little brighter, different colors than earth tones. But I think that the process that we have is kind of up to that group, the Planning Commission or Downtown Heritage District group, to at least recommend to us and the City Council ultimately what should be done downtown the Heritage District. So that's what we're here for, is this specific ordinance change is to eliminate the Planning Commission from having to make that decision-making process for colors in the Heritage District, or materials. I'll say materials. I don't know if we want to go back to covering the buildings with metal, but you know, these days there are different types of metals. Before, we used to call metals, we referred to them in our head as like tin sheds, metal farm buildings. But now they have so many different types of materials, like shingles are metal, could be metal, could be real nice metal materials. So there shouldn't be any problem with that. But, and I'm not trying to pick on anyone here, but you remember the Bromans building that really covered up all of the brick that was there? That was kind of the initiation of when that was going to be redone, what it should be done with. I wonder, was that also where the Masonic Lodge was, that was covered up at one time? I'm not familiar with that one specifically. But those are the kinds of things that we want to address with the Heritage District. The Heritage Group was real active in coming forward and saying, you know, we want to maintain the historic look of the downtown by utilizing brick and those textures and those colors. That's all this was about. So maybe I'll save the other comments for the next hearing.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. And again, the recommendation from the Planning Commission is that they would not be involved in decision-making, that any decision then would come up to the council. Yeah. So, which is really the purpose of this public hearing. So I'll open up for public comment as part of this public hearing, either from the council or for members of the audience. For this public hearing, as well as the next one, if any member of the audience wishes to speak, we'd certainly welcome that. We do ask that you use the microphone here because we are being broadcast on cable television. Welcome, Dr. Affolter.
Yes, I'm Leroy Affolter, sometimes known as Dr. Affolter. My one question with this is the Planning Commission is composed of X amount of people, each one with their own personalities and thoughts. How many people are you going to delegate this decision process to? And could there be personality clashes between the people who are wanting something done and the one or two, I don't know how many you have, that are going to be making the decision? I would have to think there'd be a more fair consideration if the Planning Commission can maintain the power over it rather than delegating it to one or two people with, and you guys know what I'm talking about when it comes to personality clashes. So we'll stop with that, and I might have some other comments later.
So the recommendation would be that it would come to the City Council. So Chair of the Planning Commission is here. I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you did want to comment, I'd welcome. Okay. Welcome out.
Yes, Al Gregg with Gregg and Gregerson. We're also under the impression that it would be better to leave it the way it is with the Planning Commission. We found that the Planning Commission has been very diligent in what they've done. They've been fair with us, particularly, but we feel that it's very important to have that kind of time. When you look at the agenda for most city council meetings, it's extensive. You're lucky to get 3 or 4 minutes per item, and you don't have time to dig into it like another committee might be able to spend 20 minutes or half an hour on that subject, where you really simply don't have the time to do that as a city council representative. So we feel that the bottom line is, too, that we may want to take a look at what's in that ordinance to see what we're actually requiring. Now, the fronts of buildings is one subject. What's behind the back sides of the buildings, where there's lots of brick, and these are older buildings, and how do you what you can do successfully on the front and still keep it in a somewhat price control is one thing, and the back sides of the buildings that are faced primarily from alleys is another thing to talk about. The new materials that are coming, that's another whole consideration that I think the whole thing should maybe be looked at as to whether or not what was done then isn't bad, but maybe it needs to be updated so it reflects what can be done successfully now.
Thank you, Al.
Russ Labatt, recently retired. So thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. I've been on the Planning Commission for probably less than a year, but I'm a little confused, and maybe the chairman of the Planning Commission can help me. But I went up and got the minutes of the meeting, and we talked about the Central Heritage District, and the Planning Commission actually voted that we said 80% of the requests are color related. So, and Mr. Gutman advised us, yes, so the majority is color, but there's a chance that the material could be considered. Fox said not sure why this was one way or another. So we made a motion and seconded to leave as is. We're wondering why the Central Heritage District was even brought before the council tonight. So I was just kind of curious.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and the council members. That is correct, but what is brought to the council is a totally different thing from what was brought to the Planning Commission. And before it was kind of, the suggestion was to take any decisions from the Planning Commission members, and they voted against that. It's not brought to the council. What is brought to the council now is just to take the material selection out, which is exactly the same as the suggestion to take the material selection out for the whole entire city. So in this case, it's kind of makes more sense to do exactly the same thing. Before it was not exactly the same thing. Now it's exactly the same thing. So whatever is brought to the council is not what was rejected by the Planning Commission.
But Chairman Fox, am I correct in saying that we made the motion and seconded and voted that we leave the Central Heritage District as is with no changes?
I believe that reported correctly.
Okay. So I can just question why.
It was a specific motion about what was proposed to change at that time, and that is not in front of the City Council right now. So what?
Let me explain.
Go ahead.
Well, to make this more clear, we had put the next item on the agenda first. And to be consistent with what you're going to do with the next one is what we wanted to do in the downtown district. So if you want to wait until you do something on the next item, that's what we requested, so that they were consistent with each other. If you don't take that responsibility of the material selection away from the Planning Commission, you certainly wouldn't do it in the downtown district. But if you do comply with what the Planning Commission asked for on the next one, it would be odd to have the Planning Commission not recommending materials, but recommending materials in the Heritage District. So that's the way we saw it as happening. It was to be consistent with whatever you do on the next one. So if you want to table this or hold it till you have a discussion on the next one, because I would hate for you to approve this one and not approve the next one, because then it would make them different again. So if that would be okay with you, hold off on this one, because the next one is the bigger issue citywide.
And I would agree with that with Mr. Olson, I think, and again, like we have in the unofficial minutes,
Yep.
80, 85, 90% of the things that happen in the Central Heritage District are color related. They're not necessarily related to materials.
Materials.
You know, so,
We
and I
agree.
think that's what the Planning Commission was leaning toward.
Yep.
We want to make the decision as far as color, but we're not qualified to make the decision as far as materials.
And that's what
So-
this does.
So,
This does just the materials, but I don't want to do this unless we do it with the other one. Okay.
So we will continue this public
Yep,
hearing.
if you
We'll
could.
conclude the public hearing. We'll move to the next agenda item for that public hearing, and then we'll consider both of the ordinances, both for this one and the next one, except for in reverse
That would
order.
be great.
Okay, so in this public hearing, any other comments, either from the public or members of the council? John?
When this issue came to L&O, and I guess I probably could jump over to the other one, but I think it's probably the same wording. The way I understood the recommendation at that point was that it was as approved by city staff first, and now it's all crossed out and there's no other alternative but to come to the city council. Is that the intent?
The intent is for us to approve what we can approve. If we deny it, it would come directly to the city council. We would still, if we don't have a problem with it, if it conforms with what we believe the ordinance says, it certainly doesn't come to city council. So staff would do the approval. If we recommend denial, it would come to city council.
And if I'm also clear on this, part of that then is to prevent the property project owner or the contractor from having to go through the variance application and all of that process, both slowing it down and adding costs,
Yep.
correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other input as part of this public hearing?
The input I have is, I was on planning and zoning for 7 years. And we had a lot of this come through planning, not a lot, but through planning and zoning. And I believe we do have good discussion. You know, the planning and zoning is as qualified as we are to discuss this, but they have more time. I can think of, we had several discussions that went, well into an hour long on information. Because at the end of the day, if planning and zoning votes for something and an owner doesn't like it, it still can come to city council.
Yep.
I think changing this and taking it out of the hands of planning and zoning is an unwise decision, because it is, we have a good group. We have a good planning and zoning commission, and it is a good place for this to be handled. And then I do agree that these ordinances that need to be looked at for other factors too. But I believe planning and zoning is a good place to handle this. And we have a very wise planning and zoning commission.
Any other input? If not, I'd entertain a motion to close this public hearing.
So move.
Motion by Craig,
Second.
seconded by John. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. The motion passes. We'll move now then to agenda item number 6. We'll come back to the action on this ordinance following agenda item number 6. Agenda item number 6, this is also a public hearing. This is a public hearing on the exterior appearance standards, the classes of material. So once again, we'll have the public hearing, and I'll call on Glenn Olson to open this public hearing.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We've already had kind of an introduction, but this is a material question. And we've thought about this one kind of long and hard. We had a material that was brought forward that seemed like a Class 3 material, and it was approved by the Planning Commission as a Class 2 material, which went from a board or wood type material to a concrete or stucco type material. Anyway, so the discussion from the Planning Commission was to take that decision-making process away from the Planning Commission and leave it with staff and ultimately the City Council. Now that I've heard some of the comments that are being made, maybe we shouldn't refer to the class of materials in the ordinance. I haven't discussed this with any of my staff yet. But rather the material itself. So if you believe that the type of material that wants to be used on the construction is adequate and approved by the Planning Commission, maybe that's more important than what kind of class of material it is. Now, the class of material is certainly related to type of material, longevity, strength, lots of things. But it's an appearance standard. So you can make metal look like brick, or you can make ephes look like concrete, or you can, if we're really thinking appearance standards and not material standards, even though the material is what we specify as being adequate for that use, that might be in an appearance standard what we're really intending to do. And if in fact the owner can come in with a material that conforms with an appearance standard, I don't know how to say this exactly right, but an appearance standard, why shouldn't the Planning Commission be able to either approve or deny that, which ultimately then will come to the council? And I know the reason why the Planning Commission didn't want to have that responsibility. It puts them in a tough spot that material then will be classified as a different class of material. We put the class of material in there to define groups of types of construction is what it was for. Types of construction. But I want to bring this up. Just pass this around. We've had very few variances in the last 10 years. We've had 26 total, 16 of those being signage and parking. We had 2 that had to do with parking that generated a landscaping response for development. So I think here for the Planning Commission, it's really not both too much work, I don't think, especially with landscaping or aesthetics. So I'm just putting it kind of in perspective when we probably have less than 5 in a 5-year period of time. Now, if we find one that we don't like, we should go through the process of changing the ordinance. If there's something wrong or missing or something that we should change in there, I'm all for changing the ordinance. But what I'm saying is probably there's not a lot of impact from either the landscaping nor the aesthetic ordinance for variances. But I think something could be done with that to leave it at the Planning Commission as well. I agree with a couple of those comments. We have a great Planning Commission that has a real varied background and experience. And you get, instead of the council seeing it, you get half-hour, 40-minute discussions at the Planning Commission. And they give good recommendations. This one was kind of a tough one because of the really the materials question. And I know class 1, class 2, and class 3 is a good way for us to put materials in a bin, but it is an aesthetic thing only. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. Part of the public hearing, we'll open it up for public comment.
I, along with Jim, on the Planning Commission for 7.5 years back in the 70s, when Schwann's burned down and all of that kind of stuff. We had a lot of decisions. The office building that I practiced in for many years was changed in 1964, so it's before a lot of you guys were born. But I'm going to pass around a picture that was given to us. It's a before and after image so that you can look at it. You can look at the materials. What was done to it was a office building that had windows way down, and you'll see what the change was. The one thing that I'll point out, though, that over time, if you look at the area above the canopy that's there, if you can see it well, there's some stucco there that had cross members of wood on it. And the roof you couldn't see because it looked like it was kind of the stuff you'd have on a Swedish or one from Switzerland, and so was this other portion. So those cross members, the wood went away, and at one time, and I don't know if we got a variance for it, I'm sorry, but if you look at the building now, that area was changed to have vinyl, and I think it looks nice. It was stucco. We didn't go to brick. If you look at what they did below, the brick part there is a monument to the Hess people. Those guys fit every one of those little blocks of stone, and I think it's the only building in town that has that. It's almost one of these things that should be vintage. There's brick around it, but I don't think the whole thing looks so bad. So I'll pass that around so that you can look at it, and then I'll make some other comments on it. And I really thank Glenn for finally put the thing of common sense into this whole issue. You get some of these things that seem to not make sense, and he's making common sense out of it. These rules that we have and the ordinance that we have, there's only one rule that can't be changed or amended or changed and thought of differently, and that comes from Scripture. So anything that we have on these things that you're talking about, there's always a variance of possibly, and you have to use some common sense in granting a variance. If it looks now, maybe you guys did it when you were on the Planning Commission, but when we had it, anytime we had something coming up, we charged the members to go out and look at the thing, talk to the people around it, get an idea so when you came to the meeting, you had some meat and potatoes to look at. Not just coming and getting the witnessing of who's showing up, but you actually looked at it. When Schwann's burned down, we went out to where Gay Ogle had his building for the eggplant, and we got Marv's building in there. So look at that stuff. Don't just think that there's something you have to follow, but use the common sense. And I mentioned it before, and Glenn kind of winked a little bit. When you're going to try to put some of this responsibility on one or two people, yes, there's going to be frictions of personality. Somebody can't talk to somebody or listen to somebody or afraid to say something. The Planning Commission was always open. Everybody could speak their piece, and we all went away happy. It's just like the lawyers. They go to court and bicker with one another, and they go out for a drink together after they're through. So let's put a little levity to this and understanding. And well, anyway, maybe I should sit down, or I'll tell you. You didn't give me a time frame as to how long I should speak, but okay, guys.
Thank you, Dr. Offalter.
See all of this now up above?
This is on 3rd Street?
Yeah, that's my office. This is all vinyl now.
Norm?
Greg and Gerson.
Norm Gregerson, Greg Gregerson Management. When we there's a certain connotation when we mention heritage district. That gives a special thing. I have been in some heritage districts, and they've been full of tourists. We don't have tourists. We've got some old buildings interspersed with newer buildings. So cost becomes a factor. 20 years ago, we think heritage, oh, everything needs to be earth tones. 20 years ago, Amazon didn't exist. We didn't have the big box stores. We had Sears and J.C. Penney's downtown. So things change. State Farm has a new office downtown with a red sign. Well, there must be a reason because they put that bright color. So I hope anybody else, any other small owner, doesn't have to go through conditional use permits and charge extra time and extra everything to be able to get a red sign or a bright sign. But advertising isn't earth tones. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Norm. Other comments? James?
James Carr from Carr Properties. So I'm not sure, Glenn, you seem to be talking a little different tone today. That
A little different.
you want to,
Mhm.
I suggest you table the whole subject and redo the ordinance. I think it's broken, dysfunctional, and anti-development. When I was at the Planning Commission, we talked about tweaking the ordinance, and I said, well, bring the stakeholders into the discussion and come to an agreement. I got nothing. And we talk about the Planning Commission, a 4-0 vote in favor of it. How many people are on the Planning Commission? Mike? 7. Yeah, so there wasn't a big consensus for that. I think we should table it, relook at it, and come to a consensus. Then go into this roundabout way and doing it that way.
James, I think that was also some of the discussion at the last city council meeting. I wasn't present at that time, but I know Councilmember Barrett Kohler was like, you know, if there's going to be changes to this really ought to go back to legislative ordinance committee, have a thorough discussion on that.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Byrne. And that was my comment, is that, you know, there was a lot here, and I wanted to see it with, you know, talking to Councilmember Lozinski, and we had a pretty good discussion that night, and it was obvious to me that we needed to do a public hearing, and I agree. I think it needs to go back to L&O, and I think we need to gather that input. James, I appreciate that comment. I appreciate the comments that were here already, and hopefully there's more here, but I agree. This isn't something, and you know, our council also just whispered over to me, goes, this isn't ready for a vote tonight, and I absolutely agree with that. I think we need to get a look at this. If we're going to do something, we need to make sure that we do it thoughtful and right.
Right. I think the you know, what point you're making is that this is not a question of is the decision being bumped up to the council from the planning commission, but the factors in the decision are the same. This is really a discussion of what does the ordinance look like.
Right.
So, and that's not what the ordinance before us is. So.
And invite the stakeholders into the meeting.
Absolutely.
Well, it's just I said,
We've been this a couple of times.
If it goes to L&O, we need to get folks like James and other builders, other developers into the discussion to help develop this to fit the city of Marshall, not based off the city of Northfield.
Having this group show up and having this kind of attendance and the input is absolutely critical for us to make these kinds of decisions and to have that input, and it can't stop here. That needs to go. That support and interest needs to follow through the process, and I'm sure it will. And you know, because I think we all want to do what's right. We don't want to do what we think is right, because I'm not in that business. I want to do what's right, and you guys know that business a lot better than I do.
James, I didn't mean to cut you off. Did you have more you wanted to say?
Pardon?
I didn't mean to cut you off. Do you want to talk more? Or?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
John, you have a comment?
Just a comment, being on L&O, I guess what I would expect to see by the participants is coming in with some fairly specific changes, comments. I think really what came to us in the first place was basically who makes the decision. Does the Planning Commission make it, or does city staff, and then bump that, you know, depending on how that goes to City Council. You know, now really sounds more like, no, kind of the decision is leave it where it's at. and let the planning commission goes. But now I think you're talking about something different yet. And to be clear in what that is, if, certainly, I'm not in charge of L&O, but I mean, to be there, it'd be nice to have something that says, here's the details, here's the areas we would like to see change, this is why there's a problem here or a problem there, and really bring it in, in a fairly specific item, and then we can, discuss it from there and have the groups determine it from that.
Have the general discussion, then then get specific after that.
That's right. Yeah.
James?
When this ordinance first came through, it went through Illinois. I know also this was a lot of time spent on it, planning and zoning. And at that time, there was not a lot of consensus on this. I sat there, I know Travis and I were on that committee along, I can't remember well, or Steve Shell was on it. And I believe that this ordinance itself did not pass out of planning and zoning with a majority vote. I believe it was a tied vote when it came forward. So I agree with you, this has been a flawed ordinance since day one. And it would be good to go through L&O than go through planning and zoning or dump some more on planning and zoning, but that is a good place to have more discussion to make it fit for the city of Marshall.
Thank you.
I want to say the same thing. I think that when you have an ordinance like this, it's clear that we don't have a good grip on the situation the way the ordinance is written now. I think that stakeholders like developers and business owners and homeowners, I mean, if we're looking at materials, the homeowners had to do it. There was a comment that Marshall doesn't have a lot of tourism. That's true. We want to make sure that the town is nice looking, but what's the function of the town? If we're going to draw millions of people in here, ideally that's a good thing, but the best advice that I ever heard is build the town so that the townspeople like it. When the townspeople like it, then other people will come in and say, this is a great place, and it'll draw more people in. But you got to make it so that the townspeople like it. The townspeople have to live with it. So developers, business owners, homeowners, they need to come to the L&O committee and kind of, like John said, guide us and give us some meat.
Great.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the other thing that's important here, too, is in this process, we have to build it in so that the decisions can be made without putting the applicants through conditional use and special appeal processes that add to the time and to the expense. We need to make the decisions and the options obvious, and we need to we don't need to have to measure in and weigh in on people's personal decisions. It either fits in or it doesn't fit in, and there's got to be good rationale why, not based on a personal preference of look or material. I think I agree. The colors have changed in the 27 years that I've been in town. The colors have changed, and it's okay. The buildings are clean. They look good. I am really looking forward to having something that we can do without a lot of agenda items, and our staff are plenty busy and our committees are busy. I think if we can get this back through the process and get it out right, I think it is to everybody's advantage.
Any other input as part of this public hearing?
I'm Jim Sikora. I'm a homeowner in Marshall, and I'm also in IT for a living, and my job changes completely over every 6 months. In the time since this ordinance has gone into effect, or when he started looking at this at 2011, the world's changed, like we all know. Amazon has taken over a lot of shopping, and now is a time when downtowns are starting to be revitalized with small boutiques, and they're starting to actually be able to thrive. If we have very restrictive ordinances that raise the price of rent or the cost of building for those people that want to build a small boutique or put a small shop in and actually be able to thrive in today's marketplace, that's going to be really difficult for them, and that's not going to be a thriving downtown for Marshall. So in my opinion, the ordinances should be redone as well, but almost gutted. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? If not, is there a motion to close this public hearing?
So move.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Steve. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. So the action to consider and the discussion at the public hearing was to refer this as well as the previous proposed ordinance change to the Legislative and Ordinance Committee.
And I would make that a motion.
I would second.
And that includes both actions, both agenda item number 5 and 6?
Yes, sir.
So discussion on that motion.
I do have one question on your motion, Craig. Since these are going back to Eleanor to be reworked, could we make that motion with waiving the fees associated with these hearings until this motion is, or until this ordinance has been reworked, so it forces the process to move along quickly so it gets done?
I'm good with that.
That's part of your motion, and that's part of your second.
I would second that.
Thanks for the suggestion.
I'll accept that friendly amendment.
Other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Well, first off, Jane, I'll give you a chance to.
She could read our minds. I'll bet she had it done already.
Okay, so who made the motion? Thank you.
Friendly amendment.
And with the
Councilmember
friendly amendment helper.
Lizinski.
I got that.
Okay, ready? We'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Thank you, everyone, for your input. When that Legislative and Ordinance Committee is scheduled, certainly we'll want to be sure that everybody's informed and notified.
That would be.
We'll move then to agenda item number 7. Agenda item number 7 is the Independence Park parking lot project. We have a resolution to consider that would accept the bid and award the contract. Glenn?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is being done for the Community Services Department for the improvement of Independence Park. It's been some time before or since we had any improvements at the parking lot area, and before we wanted to pave that, we wanted to make sure that the subsurface water was taken care of. That's why the issues with the surface water improvements. So we received the bids and recommend approval of D&G Excavating of Marshall.
And this is only the parking lot. This does not involve the trail system.
No, it's just the parking lot and the drainage improvements around it and the exit to the to Lion Street as well. It would be 3 lanes instead of the 2.
Okay. Questions for Glenn? Now that you have the recommendation, I'd entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the resolution.
Second.
Motion by John, seconded by Craig. Discussion? Now we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 8. Agenda item number 8 is to consider the award of bids for an open station compact tractor for the Public Ways Department. Once again, Glenn.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is a replacement unit for an existing unit, and it shows the bid amount, including the trade-in, for the units that met the minimum specifications. Maybe a process here by which we do this. This is budgeted a year ago during the 2017 budget process. Then the specs are put together. It goes through the Equipment Review Committee for recommendations or changes, and it comes back to council for the authorization for bids, and this is the bids that came in and recommend approval.
Comments from the Equipment Review Committee? Questions the council has?
I do have a question. We read a lot on these that it states that it requires a lot of maintenance. Is there any way, because I chatted with Carla about that, and I haven't visited with the maintenance department. How do they track that maintenance? What is a lot of maintenance?
Well, depends upon this particular unit. After $4,600, I don't know how many were on this one. Yeah, $4,700. There's not only a track of existing maintenance. Our departments mark down oil changes and changes to blades and all the maintenance that they do. There comes a time by which you know that there's going to be major repairs necessary, whether it's transmissions or engines or things like that for these kinds of equipment. So we do have a process by which we try to identify pieces of equipment that have what we call excessive numbers of hours on. These are generally commercial type units where I wouldn't, when I hit 1,000 hours on my mower, it's ready to go. So these are a lot better than the standard equipment that I normally would use. But that's the process by which we use. We have maintenance records for vehicles and equipment and each truck. And so if you did ask, I was surprised that you didn't check with either Dean Kudrin.
I got to check. I ran out of time.
Oh, okay. Or Andy Millbrook out at the airport, or Preston Stensrud.
Yeah.
Those guys keep fairly detailed records of maintenance that they do. So if any of you ever want to have, okay, what kind of maintenance has been on that vehicle or car or whatever, hopefully you can get that. But this is one of those where, for 4,700 hours, I know we have some experts in the audience that work with commercial equipment, and if that's not a good time to trade it in and replace it, let me know.
Well, and the reason I question is that I have equipment like this too. We run ours 7,000 to 8,000 hours, and we do the maintenance, we do the engine rebuild because it's cheaper.
Yep.
We're always looking at ways of cutting cost. 4,690 hours on a diesel tractor is half its life.
And maybe we get a better trade-in value at that time too. I don't know that. So
well, they resell it, so obviously you're not getting the full value out of using that vehicle. I mean, like my equipment, we drive it until it's. One of my forklifts is an 84 forklift. We're still driving it. We fix it and go because it's cheaper. It's more cost effective to do maintenance.
Another thing that the city gets that probably the private don't get is the state discounts. A lot of times we get a substantial discount because we're a municipality. I don't know that in this case. I'm just saying generally in large equipment or in specialized equipment, we get significant discounts on our replacement. So, we have a real process for replacing equipment. I think you all know that budgeting, equipment review, specifications, authorizations. So that's what you have here tonight. And if you don't think that we should be replacing this stuff, you have to just bring it up.
And that's I think we could make it last longer. I think we could save the taxpayers money by running the equipment longer, is the point I'm trying to make. I think we're replacing our equipment too soon. And, as you speak, those folks out there, they work on my equipment, so they know the hours we have on.
Mm-hmm.
And you're shaking your head, you must concur with me.
Yep. We have another guy that sold a lot of equipment sitting there too.
Other questions? Thanks, Jim.
Hey,
John?
just, I'm not on the equipment review, but I'm assuming this kind of discussion went through the equipment review, or who is?
Well, and we continuously remind ourselves on the equipment review committee that we're there for specifications to make sure that the specifications are within the requirements or the expectation that we have. We don't look at adequacy or time for replacement. That's not our job.
And that is correct. That's the job of the council.
Because I keep trying to go down that rabbit hole, or did, and I've finally been converted after a couple of years on the committee that that's not our role here. Our role here is to look at the specifications and decide whether or not that's an adequate piece of equipment. The decision is left to the council. And it's done twofold. It's done at budgeting and then when we actually approve the presentation.
Okay, any other questions? So you do have the bid before you. What's the wishes of the council?
I guess I'm looking at the turnout that's out here, and I'm wondering, obviously these people aren't here just to hear the outcome. I'm guessing there may be an opinion or some ideas that are here, and if there are, I think it's now is a good time to come forward and express those.
Mr. Mayor, I would speak congruent with Mr. Lozinski. I think that when we're looking at equipment, diesel equipment can last a long time if maintained properly. And do we need a new one? Sure, everybody could get a new one. If I had money, I'd buy a new one every year. Yeah, brand new one, you trade it off in 1 year, you get the best trade-in value. But again, looking for taxpayers, we got a lot of things coming up that are very expensive. So I think it behooves us to use our equipment until it makes sense fiscally and equipment-wise, maintenance-wise, to replace them.
The last point I'd like to make is a national night out, I was sitting in one of North ambulances, thinking, well, how often you guys replace your equipment? The ambulance I was sitting in had 245,000 miles on it, and that's what's in transport next to my trip with my face. So that's a non-profit, but they have to run their equipment until it's absolutely shot. And that's what's transporting our citizens to the hospital. 245,000 miles on it.
I think one thing that I would put in here is that, I think there's two levels of wear out that we talk about with a piece of equipment like this. It's the tractor itself, and then it's the attachments. And part of my thought is, and especially on more decks and like ground pounder tillage equipment, if we're looking at tillers or power rakes and that type of thing, we might wear 2 of those out per tractor. And I don't know what our longevity is, but I certainly think that we need to be constantly looking at attachments. But I again agree that 46.7 is not a lot of hours on a diesel tractor. I don't know if it's the transmission, but if they're maintaining it and it's not doing a lot of high torque, high pull, a lot of shuttle shifting and that type of thing, I feel looking at what our growth is this year and coming into budget times, I would really like to see us be able to maintain our budget without doing a levy increase. And I know that you can't do that if you don't tighten the belt up a little bit in areas that make sense, that don't interfere with our services. We want to take care of our employees. We want to keep our infrastructure good, but on discretionary equipment might be the place that we need to, kick the can a little bit and maybe not double the life, but if we can add a couple of years to this stuff, maybe that's what we have to look at. I know we made a decision on a pickup truck at our last meeting. I think part of that is not looking at whether the vehicle we have needs to be replaced, but I think we might have spec'd the wrong truck, and we might have tried to buy too light. So the good news is we saved that out of the 2017 budget year, but we're going to add it to the 2018, spend a little bit more, but we're going to do it a year later and take advantage of the 2 budget years. So, I can talk myself into the logic of tightening the belt up on some of this where we have some discretion. I know we do good maintenance on the equipment. Glenn, I'm going to put that back. If Preston was here, I think this is a piece of equipment that this would be more airports, wouldn't it?
So maybe Andy Millbrook is here, and maybe just some comments by the people who operate and maintain. It's a 14-year-old piece of equipment. Andy, if you want to come forward a little bit and talk about the specific vehicle or unit.
So welcome, Andy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is like a 14-year-old piece of equipment, and it's used every day, spring to fall. We are on our second attachment on the rear, and that's about worn out. And it's high torque. Most of the time it's not high torque enough, and it's pretty much all day, every day, just rev to the max. And like I said, it's not torqued enough almost for, and this new one would be a bigger tractor basically to be able to pull the more that it's trying to pull. So I guess that's all I have.
Okay, other than that, you say it is, so it's worked hard when it's in there. And any other signs of wear that you're seeing, use of oil, use of loss of transmission
fluid? Last year, not heavily, but starting to use pretty. We have to keep an eye on it every day to make sure it's not getting worse, I guess. So.
Any other questions for Andy? Not. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
Does council have enough information to take an action? John?
I guess I'm listening to the conversation and agree that we do need to watch what we're doing with spending, but also we need to go, in my mind, with what the staff is recommending to us. I don't think they're frivolous in what they're buying, and if they're looking at this is planned purchase, I say it's piece of equipment's going. I'm going to make a motion that we approve the purchase and award the bid to Lyon County Implement of Tracy.
I'm going to second that.
Motion by John, seconded by Craig. Discussion on that motion? Not, we'll move to a vote. And that motion does pass. Agenda item number 9. Agenda item number 9, consider the award of bids for the self-propelled mower for the Public Ways Department. Glenn?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is a similar one, and maybe, Andy, do you know anything about this mower as well? Could you come forward right away, please, and take any questions that there might be? See, I don't know where this piece of equipment is being used, so Andy would help.
Go ahead, Andy. You're the...
First off, for the most part of the time, it's kept at the airport. In the summer, mowing grass at the airport public ways. In the winter, it's used around town, mostly up at City Hall doing snow removal. So we put a cab on it in the winter, and in the summer we like to take it off so when we're mowing around trees and stuff, we're not hitting it. And then for maintenance, pretty much I would say we got it from Parks in 2012, so it's a hand-me-down from Parks Department. And since we've gotten it, we've put in about 16 or 17 hours on it the last 5 years. And for the last, about a year ago, we had to take the whole differential and out because the forward and pedal and reverser were sticking. And to have that shipped off to another place to get it fixed is going to be like $7 grand. And we did it in house with our mechanics for about $1,500 to $2 grand. So it's the one that's been really high maintenance for us, and the deck has been sprung, and we've cut it apart and kind of patched it together, tried to get by, I guess. So,
Sheila, would you open up the bid tab? So what you said about the removable cab, that actually answered one of my questions, is that's why you want the removable cab. Okay.
And the Castellute Enterprise one's the only one that actually met that requirement?
Yeah.
Tell me again, Andy, why you need the removable cab?
In the winter, we put a snowblower on the front or a sweeper, and we do the building maintenance uptown does sidewalks.
Sure.
So when it's really extremely cold out, it's nice to have a cab on it, I think.
So, but when you're, again, looking at taxpayer dollars, if the non-removable cab is $10,000 cheaper, can you live with a cab the whole time?
We probably could, but it's not real convenient when you're trying to mow steep ditches, I guess, and then trying to mow around trees. You wouldn't think that a little bit of weight on top of you makes a difference, but when you mow on steep angled ditches, it makes a big difference. So,
actually, the lower bid has no cab. The other two.
The lowest one has no cab, and I understand the cab for the winter, but non-removable versus removable, that's a pricey accessory.
$2 grand.
10 grand.
No,
About
$2
grand. You're looking at traded.
John?
Just a question, kind of a little bit off this, but maybe more for Glenn. This is primarily or quite a bit used in the airport. Isn't there some means that we've had before where basically the airport buys it, we get some credit on that from the state, and then from there it gets shifted to the city as the secondary user or something of that nature? Are we looking at this from the wrong purchasing end?
No, because we only have a certain amount of money available to us from the state for equipment, and generally we use the larger pieces like pickups and big blowers and those types of things. But yes, you're right. If we can get money and a grant for equipment that's primarily used at the airport, we can. But even at 50-50, it's very, I wouldn't want to be charging the airport with the expense if in fact we're using it substantially off the airport.
Okay, so it is primarily used away from the airport then, what you're saying?
It's used on the trails.
Probably
Public ways.
And yeah, probably 75% of the time it's off the airport.
Okay, all right.
Any other questions for Andy? Andy, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's Andy.
Good. I'll have you come up here, Dan, though, because otherwise it doesn't pick up over the television.
Dan Ritter. As you know, I've all been where you're at, but it looks like on this one there's only one bid that meets the specs. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Well, I'm a vendor also at the city, and I don't understand why when you set out specs and respondent fulfills all that, why you would question it other than if you're not going to spend the money at all. That's because why do specs if you're not going to follow the trail?
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
My name is Josh. I'm with Kessler Enterprises. I just wanted to point out with our bid on what we have to offer, we are a little bit higher, but in the bid it also specified that if we didn't have a John Deere attachment on there, we had to bid out a new blower to go along with it. So that's where I don't think that the cab is that much more of expense. There's also a blower to go along in there with it. So the blower actually exceeded the John Deere specification as well with that. So
and that's why the higher trade-in, because you're taking the blower
Correct.
Also with the John Deere.
Correct.
That explains a lot.
Yep.
Thank
Yep.
you. I appreciate that clarification.
Thank you, Josh.
Since you're up here, Josh.
Yes, sir.
You're just curiosity. This is a diesel motor. Hours. How many hours should these run? Because to me, 3,800 still seems light on these.
I mean,
At least when you sell me stuff, you tell me that.
to be very fair, I'm very new into the business, but a well taken care of Kubota engine. I don't think it's out of line to suggest you can get. I mean, what do you get? 5,000 hours out of it, and that's with a regular maintenance schedule. You know, following all the Kubota guidelines of warranty. I mean, the warranty guidelines as far as your increments of service and all that stuff to go along with it. So. Mm-hmm.
So we're getting close to the end because the John Deere's running that. What engine are they running?
I believe they run a Yanmar.
Same
Diesel engine?
Same comparable, right? I mean,
comparable with the. I mean, you get an under 100 horsepower diesel Kubota engine. It's the #1 selling engine in the world. Under 100 horsepower, that's any of these guys. One thing with Kubota, it's 100% made by Kubota. John Deere's a very good product. I mean, that's a well-proven product, but everything we have, it's made by Kubota. It's a Kubota-made cab. It's going to be a Kubota engine. It's going to be a Kubota everything deck to go along with it. So,
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah.
I agree with you, Craig. We're getting close, but there's a lot left here. We're leaving 1/4 of the life of this motor on the table.
but we're getting paid for it too. You know, I mean, it's not like we're getting $2,000 trade-in.
But we are not.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm just saying.
Other
I'm
questions?
gonna move that we approve the award the bid to Kessler Enterprises for the 72-inch front mount mower for public ways for 26.6, including trade-in.
Motion by Craig,
Second.
seconded by Steve. Discussion? Not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Thank you. Move then to agenda item number 10, which is the consent agenda. We'll bring the items up on the screen on the consent agenda. So on the consent agenda would be consider the adoption of ordinance amending Chapter 2, 622, 30, 38, 42, 50, 54, 62, 66, 70, 74, 78, and 82 of the Code of Ordinances. This relates to changing the title of the finance director and city clerk. Also on the consent agenda is the bituminous overlay project. We have a change order to consider with Dunick Incorporated. We have a permanent utility easement in Westwood Acres, Block 1, Lot 18, a application for an exempt permit for Marshall M Club for an event October 18, 2017, and then the bills and the project payments. Is there any item on the consent agenda any member of the council wants removed for purposes of separate discussion?
I move the agenda as presented.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Steve. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes.
Mr. Mayor, if I could just for a second, Jim, and a point on the approval thing. I agree. I understand where you're coming from on this. I think that we're in the wrong end of the slot for picking and choosing those out. That's where we really are going to need to work hard in the budgeting part coming into it. And I know you weren't part of that because that happened last council.
Yep, and I agree with you.
And I respect that.
So,
okay.
We do.
All right.
Thank you, Craig.
Thanks.
I like guidance.
No, it's not guidance. It's just just a clarification.
So we're on agenda item number 16 then, which would be consider the resolution approving the property acquisition and interfund loan between the City of Marshall and the Housing and Redevelopment Authority. Dennis?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. At last council meeting, 2 weeks ago at the HRA meeting, you authorized the execution of a purchase agreement for the acquisition of the former Helena property located at 1403 West College Drive in Marshall. This would provide the funding mechanism to support that proposed purchase of property. As we discussed earlier with the HRA, there have been some changes. Helena is much more reluctant to sell the property than they were 2 weeks ago. So I would request that we approve the funding mechanism, but if the property is not to be sold, then this motion would be null and void if the purchase does not occur. But it would be nice to have the funding mechanism in place in case we can reinstitute those discussions. Thank you.
Questions for Dennis?
I have one.
Yes.
So Dennis, this, if we vote it and they pull out, this in no way, shape, or form obligates the city to spend any money.
Correct. Correct.
Any other questions? If not, is there a motion?
I so move.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Jim. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 17. Agenda item number 17, consider the request of Holy Redeemer Catholic Church for a columbarium, street pedestrian access, and a restricted parking at Calvary Catholic Cemetery. Glenn?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is East Main Street. This is the Catholic Cemetery entrance across from Hy-Vee, and they have constructed a columbarium in this location, and the request is to make a access point along the street and restrict parking on 10 feet on either side of the ADA ramp going to the columbarium. We've reviewed it. We asked the applicant to contact at least the adjacent property owners across the street, indicating that there would be some parking restrictions. The response back to me was, talk to both of them, neither one had a problem with it. So I would recommend approval of the restriction of parking to allow the church to install that access point. They are going to be responsible for 100% of the cost of the installation, the curb and gutter, the ADA access, the striping, and the signage necessary.
Frank, do you have a question? Thank you, Glenn.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to be able to reiterate that we did discuss this at the Public Improvement Transportation Committee and also recommended that this move forward and be approved.
Okay. Steve?
Glenn, you talked to the houses across the street. You talked to the house that's immediately adjacent to the property as well. So on that picture, up on the top there, there's a house right there.
No, we only request. I don't know if they did or not, but only these two property owners we asked them to contact.
It's really only going to affect the parking on 10 feet on either side of the 10 feet or that ramp.
Not necessarily. If you get a big funeral.
Yeah, but this is only restricting. It's only
Right.
taking out 3 parking spots. Well, not
Yeah,
even
they
that,
can
taking
park
out
along
2.
the rest of the street.
John?
Just curiosity, is it purely distance that they're going to 8th Street versus the own parking facility, which I know I realize is small, but just curious why they went that direction versus the other direction.
Just convenience. It's more convenient to come from that direction, especially if you just want to stop, go visit, come back and leave. That's,
And there are some graves in the, you get towards the other direction too, so, I don't know. Is Quentin here tonight?
Yes.
Yep.
Well, there you are, so. So, I'm sorry, I didn't see it back there, so if.
We're hiding on purpose.
Yeah, you were behind Josh, that's why I couldn't see it.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Quentin Brunzold, I'm the administrator of the Catholic Church. We decided to go towards 8th Street because it's only 60 feet versus going to the little parking lot area, it's like 150.
Okay, so it's
It's
purely
going
a
to cost
cost.
us 10 grand this way versus 35,000 the other. I'm making that number up, but I'm probably not far off. So that's why we decided to go that direction.
Any other questions for Quentin, as long as you're here? Not, thank you. So you have the recommendation. I would entertain a motion.
I'll move the motion.
Motion by Steve,
Second.
seconded by Craig. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 18.
Mayor?
Yes.
On that note, I would like to thank Quentin because this got a little behind due to it got shuffled under some papers, and as a citizen, he took the bull by the horns and got this rolling for himself. As Glenn will say, if you look at our letter, it's March 21st, and stuff happens. But Quentin, as a citizen, took the prerogative, whatever, to get this going.
Prerogative, yeah. Mhm. So, yeah. Well said. Thank you.
Easy for you to say, great.
Thank you.
On agenda item number 18, the project Z38, this is South 2nd Street, Lucille Street, Maple Street, William Street reconstruction. Two actions before us this evening, the resolution declaring the cost to be assessed in order in the preparation of the proposed assessment, as well as the resolution for the hearing on the proposed assessment. Glenn, anything to add?
I think I'll just say that you can see the project was about $1.5 million with about $354,000 assessed to the property owners. We will be sending out individual notices to all the residents at least 2 weeks before the hearing, whenever that is scheduled. So I guess that's all the information I have.
Questions? If not, on motion number 1, I'd entertain a motion.
I'll move motion number 1, resolution.
Second.
Motion by John, seconded by Craig. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. And then the second action is the resolution for the hearing on the proposed assessment, calling for the hearing.
I move the resolution.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Steve. Discussion? We'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 19. Similar action. This is on East Lion Street, Jean Avenue, East Redwood Street, B Street reconstruction. 2 resolutions to consider. Any questions about those resolutions?
I'll move the first resolution.
Motion by John, seconded by Jim for the resolution declaring the cost to be assessed in order in preparation of the proposed assessment. Discussion on that motion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes, and the second action would be the resolution for the hearing on the proposed assessment.
So moved.
Motion by Steve, seconded by Jim. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 20 is the Commerce Industrial Park, Michigan Road, the resolution designating the use of the general fund reserves. I'll call on Carla Drown, our finance director.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Before you tonight, we have a resolution designating the funds for the deed grant BDPI project that we have discussed prior for the Commerce Industrial Park Michigan Road. What this is doing is, this is the last piece that's the deed grant needs to approve and move on to the Minnesota Management and Budget committee to do the final approval so we can get the money approved, granted to us, and the project can start. So we have one or two choices. We can wait for the bonding process and get the bonded funds and then send deed the information that we have those funds bonded for. Or we can do a resolution taking the undesignated general fund monies that we have undesignated at this current time and put that over to this project, show that to deed that we have those funds, and then once we get the bonded funds coming back in, those monies will then reimburse ourselves back into our general fund.
So this would allow the actual award of the contract so the project could get started.
Significantly quicker.
Yeah, well, it might
And
speed
then-
it up by what, as much as 2 months, maybe?
It can speed it up by as much as 2 months, possibly even 3. So,
Okay, thank you, Carla. Questions?
I move the resolution.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Jim. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 21. Agenda item number 21, consider the resolution calling for the prepayment and the redemption of Series 2007C and Series 2009A bonds. Carla?
all right, as a result of our 2016 audit, it came, we were recommended to call these bonds because we have sufficient funds sitting in those funds. And in review and with consultants, Springstead, that has been noted and verified that those funds are available to pay this off. Call those two bonds. Calling those two bonds would be called October 1st of 2017. And at that time, we will have a cost for the 2007C of $464,493.33 with a savings of just about $5,000. And the 2009A bond is a cost of $819,175 with a cost savings there of $38,000 by calling these at this time.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Carla.
I would move that we accept that.
Second.
Motion by Steve, seconded by Jim. Discussion?
Anytime we can save money, I think it's a good thing.
Yep. And thanks for your work on this. So we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number.
I knew you said even before the meeting started.
Agenda item number 22. Consider the approval of the transient merchant license for Carla Liss Budris. And then along with this request, the applicant is requesting the waiver of the fee also. So Jane, do you have details on this?
Attached to the packet is a letter from him. He is a student working for Southwestern. They come to Marshall every few years and they sell educational books. And he's going to be in Marshall for a couple of weeks and then he's going back to his hometown of Lithuania. So he is asking to be able to have the fee waived so that he's able to make more money to go towards his college.
We do have a precedent on doing this. Several years ago, I think we waived the fee on a similar short term.
Only we have waived the fee. And I also attached a copy of the city code in your packet.
Questions the council has?
I guess that was my question, Mr. Mayor, was if we've done this in the past, if that's a common request, we would still be requiring the bond, correct?
Yes, that will come from Southwestern.
Okay. I guess I'm not opposed to doing that. I think that, these are some of the things that, kind of as a community, there's a benefit to it. And I mean, I know that fee is how we help to manage and maintain our services. But by the same token, I think that even the government can have charity.
It's a fairly rare request too. I mean, it comes up like once every several years. Other input, Steve?
Mr. Mayor, I think the fee request to waive it completely, you know, when you're in business, and this is the cost of learning business, and he's in college, we have no idea what he's studying. I don't disagree that $315 is steep, and I would request it to be waived too. I would actually make a motion to decrease it by 90%, leave it $31.50 to give him a taste of a cost of a fee. I would make that motion.
I'll second it.
Motion by Steve, seconded by Craig. Sorry, I was allowing you time to cough there.
The cough.
$31.50.
One time.
One time he pays a
Structure
transient merchant.
$31.50.
That way he's still paying a transient merchant fee. Everybody's got to pay it.
So discussion on that motion. Jane, I'll give you a minute here. Whenever you're ready, let me know. Okay, so you have the substitute motion.
Looks good.
I would ask you to move to a vote then.
Who is second?
Motion passes. Agenda item number 23. Agenda item number 23, consider the appointments, the mayoral appointments to the Marshall Municipal Building Project Review Committee. We have had discussion on this for some time, and for a number of years there was has been various studies as well as at least one or two committees that have looked at the condition of the Marshall Municipal Building, including the handicap accessibility issues that we have in the building, including some of the infrastructure problems we have in the building, including the portions of the building that we cannot use because of safety issues, as well as the conditions of the exterior windows, and finally the functionality of the building itself to serve the public. So at the work session that the council had last week, the discussion was to move forward with the appointment of the Municipal Building Project Review Committee. So I would ask or recommend that the following individuals be appointed to this committee. I'd ask John DeCramer, City Council, to chair this committee, along with two other members, Glenn Barracola and David Sturrock. That staff on this committee be the city administrator, which obviously would be Sheila Dubbs, as interim until the new administrator is hired. The Director of Community Services, Scott Vandermellen, Director of Public Works, City Engineer Glenn Olson, our City Assessor David Parsons, our Executive Assistant Kathy Lee to be the Recording Secretary, and Carla Drown, our Finance Director, and citizens at large who have been contacted and have agreed to be appointed, if that's the wish of the council, would be Mr. Art Olson, Mr. Ron Helgerson, and Mr. L. Gregg. So I would offer that as a recommendation and entertain a motion to affirm those appointments to the City Hall Committee.
Second.
Motion by Jim, seconded by Steve. Discussion?
I think it's important to move forward with this. The City Council building looks good from the outside on the front of Main Street. Looks can be deceiving. I think it's high time to replace the aged and falling apart building.
Other discussion? John, thank you for agreeing to chair this committee.
Yep.
We'll move, let me see, did we have a motion?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, then we'll move to a vote.
Second.
Okay, then we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 24 is consider appointment to the Community Services Board. Earlier this evening, Councilmember Meister and myself and the Matt Coleman representing the school board interviewed a applicant for the Community Services Board, and based on that I would recommend that Amran Mohammed be appointed as the youth representative, student representative on the Community Services Board. Motion by Steve.
Second.
Seconded by John. Discussion? This is a very impressive young person who will be a very good addition to the Community Services Board. This young lady is also a student representative on the school board. Any other discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. At this time, I'm going to call for a 5-minute recess.
Lot of
Scott.
traffic.
Scott. Time I'll reconvene the meeting. We are on agenda item number 25. The commission board liaison reports from my part, I'll pass at this point. And Craig?
Mr. Mayor, none of mine have met since our last meeting. The library board meets next Monday.
Hey, Steve?
Mr. Mayor and Council, we met on Community Services Advisory Board. We have some big projects coming up. We reviewed some of the activity that's been going on through the summer, some of the big projects coming up. We talked a little bit about our work session with pool issues and splash pad and things like that. More to come on that as we go through the year. Economic Development Authority did not meet.
Okay, thank you, Steve. John?
Mine did not meet.
Jim?
Mine did not meet.
So then we'll move to agenda item number 26.
You want me to run?
Which is council member individual items. Craig?
I really don't have, I have one thing, and I want to take my hat off to Glenn and Jason and our Public Works Department. Of course, we all know that the fair is running out at the county fairgrounds this week, and one of the feature things there is going to be the 9/11 traveling memorial. And so I had a lot of conversation with Mr. Claith and some ideas about how and where that's going to be set up. And there was, because I work on that campus in the Public Works building, second floor for the county, we had some ideas about the placement of that probably being the best between the Public Works building and the old Lockwood Arena in that parking lot area. The county's been doing a lot of deconstructing and reconstructing of their rain garden pond and some other things with modifications to the Lockwood Arena for their operations in there. So that lot had a lot of construction debris and scatter there, and of course through the fairgrounds from normal use in the summer. And through Glenn and Jason, the request went in, and I made the request on behalf of the county, and our Public Works folks went out and did a really nice job of sweeping that. And I think that that's prudent for us to do as part of our management of our stormwater enterprise, our MS4 program anyway. But there was absolutely zero pushback. They went back out last Friday at 4 in the morning when everything was absolutely clear and did a stellar job. It looks really good, and I know that the county people, the people that are working to present the fair, and I know that Mark and the folks of that traveling memorial are going to appreciate it too, because it gives a really nice platform. And I just want to commend the fact that we have city staff that work very hard and most of the time behind the scenes and unnoticed to do the work for the city of Marshall, and I think they do a more than a commendable job. And I just wanted to take a minute to recognize some of the things that I know firsthand, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you for saying that. And as long as you're on that topic with the 9/11 traveling, you want to talk about the event on Sunday at
I think you better, because I apologize, Mr. Mayor, and I want to apologize to everybody here too that I have family plans that are taking me out of town as soon as we get done tonight. I'll be in Texas, and regrettably, I won't be here for it.
So I'll talk about that. Thank you, Craig. Steve?
The only thing that I want to say is I'm impressed with the students and the members who come forward to volunteer on the committees that we have. And I think that we need to encourage all city members, if they have any interest, any inkling of interest in government, you have a place in Marshall, because we were more than happy to entertain participation in our committees and our boards.
That's all very good. Jim?
I have a couple things. Earlier this week, we had a contractor come up to discuss the concrete going in and out at Freedom Park. And, you know, Preston does a wonderful job. He's very energetic. He gets the best out of his employees. This contractor just raised the question of maybe it is cheaper actually to have a contractor do it, which as a general contractor, I understand that. So we had a discussion with Glenn, and I visited with Carl, and we're going to see if we can't track what it actually costs to do that. And it's nothing against Preston. I mean, it's just like my crew doesn't do concrete. I've never laid a stitch of concrete in a house I built. Just not cost effective. So on that, we were going to track the actual cost of what it takes to do that and see if it is cost effective. We don't know. Preston, and I believe Preston is very cost effective at what he does, but then we can show that we are saving money. And then the second issue, and they've been visiting with Glenn, is there's a group of people I've been discussing dust on Skunk Hollow, but I think you guys are handling that as in the interim there, and after the meeting, I think they'll probably visit with you some more.
I'd
more discussion on
yeah.
it, James.
Well,
I could touch base on it.
We came here to discuss.
Well, that's, be Glenn and the mayor. It's not on the agenda. I don't know if that's something, if you want to touch base on that, Glenn?
So you can talk about it when we get to the staff reports. Okay, thanks, Jim. John?
I've got 2 items, unfortunately both for Dennis. One is the coming back on basically our 9/11 house again. Just, I know there's brought it up last time or one other time about just seeing where that's at, but just some complaints by the neighborhood that not only is the parking an issue, but basically people actually just standing in driveways and not moving when people are trying to get in and out of their driveways, and it's that's creating a problem, or still a problem there, I should say. And then the second item that was also brought up, a complaint by a citizen, and I've heard that before, is the location on 8th Street that is having a lot of items in the backyard, and basically looks like Tent City back there. So I think that one was referred to your office, perhaps, on getting the trying to get that homeowner to clean up his backyard.
I have not heard a recent complaint. I
dealt
with him a year ago.
Yeah, okay, about a year ago. This is basically, it's still there and ongoing or whatever, so it's still there on 8th Street, so that's it.
Okay, so Dennis, you have the information?
Yes, I do. I recall that residence.
So from my part, the Sunday, August 13th, and when the traveling exhibit, when that's taken down, then there is a appreciation supper, not only for the crew that is with that traveling exhibit, but then for, and Sheila, you can help me with this, but the law enforcement and fire department and emergency responders from the county were all invited. Is that correct?
Kathy Lee is handling that, so I apologize. I don't have that.
So anyway, it's a recognition of the emergency responders, and I think everybody has received information. And if you're available to come, if you're not available to come, certainly that's understandable. But if you are available to come, it's one of those times to thank those emergency responders. The second thing is I was not in attendance at the last meeting. I was going to thank Councilmember Sturrock for chairing the meeting, but obviously he's not here this evening, so hopefully you guys weren't.
Pretty rough on
these meetings. So so I do apologize. I actually was hospitalized that night, and I watched you all on TV that evening. So
do we look as good in person as we do on TV?
Well, I heard you at least, so. With
diplomatic way of answering your question.
With that, we'll move on to agenda item number 27.
I have no update this
Staff
evening.
reports, Sheila, and then Glenn.
Well, maybe I'll start with the discussion of Skunk Hollow Road. I know at least one council member, if not more, had comments from the residents living alongside that roadway. And as you remember, that was a county road turnback several years ago with certain dollars put in a fund for dedication for improvements to that roadway. I don't know how much is in that fund, but it has been kept, and I'm sure there's interest that's going into it as well. It's not very much money as far as I remember. So Carla, do you know how much money might be in the Skunk Hollow Road Fund?
I do not.
Okay. But that's something that we can check and get to those people. They've had had, I'll say, 3 complaints. One is the condition of the roadway, both for dust, and what we do is when we get a complaint, I get a hold of the street department, and they get a hold of D&G Contracting to come out and spray the road. There's 2 roads that we do dust control on, and only in their case adjacent to the residences. That road and East Lion Street next to Dock Ports and the Mercantile and that short stretch that's inside the city limits. So those 2 things we do. Now, when you grade a roadway with gravel and then you put the dust control down, it's a chloride type spray that you put down there to control that. That lasts as long as, until it washboards again. And then when you come and maintain it with the maintainer, it cuts that off again. So it becomes another expense for spraying it again. And we do it on a complaint basis like we do on a lot of roadways. They'll actually be doing that roadway Thursday, I believe. I think I forwarded you an email from the department that said it's lined up, but they had some problem with their equipment, and dog ate my homework. So anyway, they're planning to do it on Thursday. However, that doesn't, and one other complaint is excessive speeds. And I think that also was turned over to the police chief for a comment. Now, I know that they've got issues with where they divide up their services, and I would expect that most of the speeding or in dust control would probably happen going to work and leaving work, because that's the road that most people that live in that quadrant that come into work like to cut through to Bruce Street. So it is a problem for traffic. It's a lot of traffic volume there. Well, in our long-term or our 5-year CIP, the intent is to extend the county road south past Deitz's to Fairview Street. That opens up development on both sides of that roadway within the city limits. The properties that we're talking about serving here adjacent are outside the city limits. They're not in city limits. The road is in the city limits, but the residents are not. So when they call any one of you, is it a great priority? Well, it's a priority because safety is always a priority. And we would be paying for that improvement, whatever it is, blading or dust control, for really the traffic outside the city limits. And that's okay with me as long as you direct it to be done that way. But ultimately, and they're all here, ultimately our intent is to either turn it private or make it a minimum maintenance road and do a large improvement on the county road extension and Fairview Street extension. So that's where it is. I don't expect any direction or anything other than what we're doing, but you may want to at least acknowledge that those are the problems: roughness, dust, and speeding. Okay, so that being said, we've got a lot of projects that are, some coming to a close, some just starting. Trunk Highway 68 going west is nearing completion. They finished all the asphalt work. They're doing the shouldering work today. The ditches are being shaped up and will be seeded probably this week. And so you'll see probably the traffic control coming down, the striping removed, new striping put in, and there'll be some new signage going up. But for all practical purposes, the project is complete other than traffic control. The water main project on Highway 59 going north ran into we'll call it a major glitch, in that the CenturyLink has a fiber that runs through there that's not locatable. They have two cables. One was located, the other was not. And in order for the contractor to put in the water main, it's got to be located. Not only is it a fiber, it's a 911 fiber. And so CenturyLink will come in and bore a brand new one with a metallic outside so that they can locate it in the future. But they can't change over that service until 911 says they can. And until that, our contractor is stopped from what he can do, and because you certainly don't want to just go in and find it with a backhoe. Okay, so that's on hold, and the CenturyLink knows that there may be contractor expenses that are associated with that delay, but it is what it is.
Is that theirs? Is that CenturyLink's then?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the intent. The city will not pay for the extra time. We will cooperate with them to get it done as soon as possible, but we can't move until they get that done.
When was that fiber laid?
Oh, I do not know. We were looking for any records of that, but they don't have to give us, there's no permit required for that. There's a permit required for it, but CenturyLink is not a television supplier, so they should have a payment for a permit for it, but there is no locate provision. On everything that we lay that's plastic or non-metallic, we lay a locate wire with it, with contact ends. But in this case, it wasn't done, so it wasn't located, and now we have the issue. But it's going forward, but that's why the project isn't complete. Highway North 7th Street is nearing completion. There's a water main project complete, and we had to go through the channel. We had to kind of delay that till the water levels went down in the bypass channel. But then the total reconstruction of the street has one lift of asphalt left on it. Contractor requested today holding off on that until there's like 4,000 tons of material that has to be hauled in and out on that road for the Milroy job, and there's two in a job north of here. So the contractor requested that we delay the final lift until that's done, so that if there's any imperfections, it can be taken care of before the final lift is put on. So we approved that today.
Open in the
The road is open. We're going to leave the barricades local traffic only, but local traffic means you can go up to the compost site.
Well, that also takes some of the pressure off of Skunk Hollow Road, too.
Right, it would. So we won't have barricades up there saying local traffic only, so that'll come through there.
Why are those signs up there for?
The signs will still be there, two of them, one on each end.
So that street isn't open yet, isn't finished, or?
It's not finished. It still needs the last layer of asphalt.
But it's open for local traffic. You can drive through there.
You can drive through there. Okay. We just want to make sure the public knows that there.
That sign we like out on Skunk Hollow Road.
Yeah, I'd love that.
So
I think we need to have a little more discussion on that. It seems like we just kind of oofed right by that one. I didn't feel like we were quite done.
Was not on the agenda.
it's up to you. Right.
So is this, we need to bring it up so it's on the next meeting? Is that how it works here?
Or come to see me to see if there's any alternatives that you can suggest to the
Maybe we
council.
can get some bids on what it's going to cost to do an overlay on it and get back to where at least where it was a year ago.
We sure can, but that's not our intent unless you direct us to.
So you can have some discussion outside, and then when it's ready to come back as an agenda item.
What, $400,000 on the parking lot at the park? I mean, we could spread this money around a little bit, maybe.
Okay, and then the O'Connell Street project is coming along. The water main is installed. They're working on the subcut, and we'll be doing the drain tile, stormwater work on it this week. I would expect by next week they might be ready for some asphalt for that. And I understand that we are in contact with the property owner to get an update of the of the progress on the Kmart building. That's all. Oh, one more item. Last Saturday was a special event at the airport for Ray Johnson's funeral that was probably the largest fly-in that we've had. And it was in very short notice, very well attended. I've got a picture of the multimodal transportation with a bicycle, the vintage cars and the airplanes all together in one place. So we'll be using that for some other future presentations, but what a wonderful send-off. So that's all I have.
And thanks to the airport staff. I know Andy's here.
Yeah.
Did a lot of work out there
sure did.
prior to that time too, so thank you.
Yeah.
Dennis?
Nothing more to add. That's a good way to end that discussion. Yeah.
We'll move on then to agenda item number 30, which is the pending agenda items. Any questions about the pending agenda items? If not, the information items, number 31, including the building permits. The upcoming meetings, agenda item number 32, which brings us then to agenda item number 33 to consider adjourning.
I'd motion to adjourn.
Motion by Steve, seconded by Jim to adjourn. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Well, it depends if Craig votes.
Huh? Let's vote.
I did.
Vote no.
Try voting again.
Okay,
There.
we're adjourned. Motion
I know
passes.
you were expecting